Welcome back to the FITSNews studios, another edition of your Week in Review. A big episode this week, folks, focused on Mica Miller. This case continues to dominate coverage, dominate discussion. It's all anyone is talking about here in South Carolina. The story of the beautiful pastor's wife whose supposed suicide, again, has just created a ton of unanswered questions. To try and answer them, we're going to sit down today with some team coverage. Our Jen Wood, we're usually talking to her on the earphones. She's here in the studio today, along with Andy Fancher. Jen and Andy have been covering this case from Myrtle Beach, tracking Mica Miller's final journey in late April that ended in her supposed suicide up at a state park in North Carolina. We're going to hear from them on everything that they learned on their trip. We're also going to tell you about a story that we covered last summer, a violent sexual assault sentencing in that case. Turns out it had a connection to the Murdaugh saga that no one saw coming. We're going to tell you what that connection is and why it matters. All that and more is coming your way on the Week in Review. All right, so I'm joined now by Andy Fancher and Jen Wood, who spent the early part of this week on the road in Myrtle Beach covering this Mica Miller story. Guys, is this the craziest thing we've ever covered?
It is a very crazy story, and it just keeps getting crazier.
Now, I don't want to oversimplify this, but one of the things I love about this media outlet is that we debate these things passionately amongst ourselves. We get in each other's faces about these stories. And I'm going to oversimplify this, but Jen, you're diving down conspiracy rabbit holes. And Andy, you're kind of holding up the law enforcement's end of the equation on this. Although that's oversimplifying. But it's safe to say you guys on the car rides had some back and forth over this case and where you think it's going.
Oh, respectful back and forths, sure. We were certainly taking advantage of the open microphone policy here at FITSNews, which I plan to do here today, as is Jen. I mean, you know me, I am a stickler for receipts, all right? Absolutely. You know, show me the evidence, not the passions, not the spirits, not even the intuitions, the evidence.
Right.
And that's where I take a bit of issue oversimplifying with this case.
Well, let me ask you this, Andy, and Jen, I want to ask you too. We've looked now at the full surveillance video of Mica Miller at the pawn shop where she purchased the gun that she, again, we're going to still use the word supposedly, according to police, used to end her life. Are we all now in agreement that that's Mica Miller in the pawn shop?
I feel very confident after seeing the video. It is Mica Miller.
Because the still shots were a little...
and I had a feeling it was going to be the angle. You're looking at, a still shot from a surveillance camera video, and, the quality wasn't bad. I couldn't get there with just the still shot, but with the video, I did get there.
And obviously this was the first stop on her trip from the apartment complex where she was staying to the Lumber River State Park in North Carolina, where she ultimately, again, according to Robeson County Sheriff's investigators, took her life. But let's talk a little bit about, obviously, we now agree that's her in the pawn shop. There's folks still in some circles that claim, no, it's not her. We're going to set that issue to bed, though. Let's ask this question, though. The image that we see of her on the Ring camera when she leaves the apartment, she's dressed for work. And she works, where's the place she works, Jen?
J. Peter's restaurant in Myrtle Beach.
In Myrtle Beach. It's about 12 minutes away from that apartment.
22 minutes.
I'm sorry, 22 minutes, okay.
According to Google Maps, give or take traffic, but, middle of the day, 22 minutes.
And the pawn shop where she purchased the gun is on the way to the restaurant, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so she's dressed in her work attire.
Mm-hmm.
She leaves that apartment at 11:38, knowing she's got to be at work at noon. She's very conscientious, always calls to work when she's going to be late. All of her friends and family say she absolutely would have called them and said she wasn't going to be at work. Didn't make that call. But to a pawn shop 12 minutes away, she ends up there, 32
minutes.
Well, let's also not forget here, that's 12 minutes according to when we did it on a Tuesday?
Tuesday.
A cloudy Tuesday.
Midday. Yes, absolutely.
She made this trek on a Saturday.
In a beach town.
When it was sunny out.
But talking to people that live there, they said 32 minutes would be absolutely very unlikely.
When you and I have respectfully disagreed, because it seems like we're kind of basing this off of a 15-minute gap.
Right.
All right, so we don't know what she did when she got in her car, whether she made a call before or we don't know.
Maybe she sat in her car, maybe she
I mean, to say that I just hop in the car and go, no. I mean, I mess with the aux cord. Sure, I might make a call. And on top of that, we don't know what the route was, which could, contribute to some conspiracies, perhaps. But I think to make this major argument off of an approximate 15-minute window, I don't know. I have some concerns about that.
I think that's fair. And to make that argument, we'd have to have additional information from investigators, because there could be a very valid reason.
Let me ask this question. Was there any indication prior to her leaving the apartment that morning that J.P. Miller knew where she was?
Well, she had trackers placed on her vehicle at least twice in the past, according to incident reports we obtained.
Razor blades on the tires, too.
Razor blades in the tire. So, yeah, I think that, I think it would be reasonable to ask if there was a tracker on her car at the time.
Okay. But here's what gets me, and again, Andy, you're absolutely right. There's a million things that could explain this. But what gets me is this woman leaving the apartment right around the time you would think she'd leave to go to work, dressed for work. And I guess the argument is that there's a lady she was staying with. Some have said, well, maybe she didn't want to...
maybe she didn't want to worry
alarm her. Yeah, right. But to me, it feels like this woman was going to work.
Well, I mean, had she left at 38, you said it was how long to get to her work?
About 22 minutes.
I mean, that would have put her there at exactly noon. Was she a punctual person? Was she somebody who shows up early or late to things?
I have not got that indication.
Okay.
People have said she's very conscientious, so, but whether or not punctual, I can't.
There is no room for error on the route that she was going to take that morning. And then, the arguments that were made regarding the person in the Ring doorbell is not the same person at the pawn shop. Well, okay, we've got side profiles, we've got front profiles, wearing the same earrings, same sunglasses, same backpack. Sure, the uniform came off, but what's to say that whatever that black attire she was wearing was not just some athletic thing under her uniform, which, if you look at the evidence photos that was provided by Robeson County Sheriff's Office, which I think it's quite humorous that the most critical person in this room of law enforcement is the one now defending them in a weird way. In those evidence photos provided by the Robeson County Sheriff's Office, you see what appears to be that uniform folded up in the passenger seat under the toasted sandwich, which I'm sure we'll get to in a minute. And then another thing I noted was it appears as though the shirt she's wearing in the pawn shop is also wadded up in that passenger seat next to the uniform.
Oh, that's a good catch. You haven't mentioned that one before.
Something I've just observed there, among other things that I'm sure we'll get into. But anyway, pull me back here.
No. I mean, this is exactly why we talk about these things, is we notice those things. Let me ask you guys this. You guys made this trip. You literally traced her journey, her final journey on the way to that state park. Let me ask you this. When you got there, when you were at that remote location, what'd you feel? What were your takeaways? Andy, let's start with you. What was your gut when you got there?
Well, sure. So, we can't rely on intuition, right? And something that I've discussed with Jen here is, there's a difference between what you know and what you can confirm, right? There's a difference between the story you want and the story you're going to get. Now, that's what concerns me, because my intuition, for instance, I feel that the Lawrence Police Department is hiding a cover-up, but it took a minute for me to get the receipts proving that it appears as though there is a cover-up. Going there, sure, I had some service issues that I'm sure we can laugh about now, because I was trying to do some promotional material that just fell through. It was a horrific failure. But, walking the trails, we saw two people fishing when we got there who were not the same people fishing when we came back, who were buddied by somebody else. So while it is a remote location, it's not an untrekked, if that's even a word. It's not inaccessible. I mean, you had vehicles, plural, of rangers present. I would feel a lot more comfortable speaking with some degree of certainty had we found the location that she killed herself, according to law enforcement twice over. I have no freaking clue. The coordinates, tell me about the coordinates. The coordinates that we had punched into the phone, were they based off of the pings that E911?
It was the coordinates that 911 pinged.
Okay.
And we don't know when they pinged that.
Right. We don't know when they pinged it and how exact those coordinates are. Is it, within 100 feet? Is it within 1,000 feet?
Because it's my understanding the cell phone was not on her person, right? And her person was somewhere in the water downstream, right?
Upstream, I think.
Upstream to...
It's a good question, though. Yeah.
So
we are working on getting clarification on that today.
Was it found in a bag, the cell phone? Where was the cell phone?
In the bag, but I'll have to double check my latest interview.
Okay, then that's fair. And so if we're going now to the crime scene, which again we didn't get to the very spot. I can't speak with any certainty on how I felt since I don't even know how close we were to it. Although it does not appear as though we got there.
You're in a forest. Are you off?
So here's what we believe and what people who have been to the site have said is that it is down. So you go down this path about, I don't know, half a mile in.
I'll say half a mile to a mile, at least to the observation deck.
It felt like 8 miles, but I'll get to
well, if you're wearing your leopard print slides with your Louis Vuitton handbag, yeah. When we came out of that forest, it looked like we had just partook in a tour of Vietnam.
Come on now.
No, I'd support it.
It did look like, yeah. It was, so anyway, but it's from what I'm told, she went down a restricted access path. Okay. So it was for park employees only, and it had rained quite a bit before we got there, so the water was high. The parts of the path were covered with.
I mean, unless you had,
peaceful?
waders.
Is it tranquil? Is it
very peaceful, very quiet, very serene, very isolated?
Okay. Now you got some sound here from the fisherman who found her body. Is that correct?
No, he found a bag.
Her bag.
Correct.
I'm sorry, yes.
He never laid eyes on the body.
One, yes.
Yeah.
All right, let's cut to that real quick. I want to hear from this guy. Let's take a listen to. Tell me his name, Jen.
Johnny Jacobs.
All right, Mr. Jacobs, tell us what you found.
I fished that place right regularly. Matter of fact, Mica's sister, she I'm the one that called Mica's sister name and told her she didn't know where it happened at. She wanted to know exactly where I found her belongings there. I don't know what made me pick up those belongings that day. I wasn't thinking about, and I understand, I probably shouldn't have. I don't know why I did it, but I took those things straight to the law. I took nothing out of it. There was money in it and everything that was in it. I don't know what made me. It had 3 different compartments in it. Okay, it was probably, I'd say, it might have been 2 foot away from the bank whenever I found it. Like I said, I hadn't even realized what had even happened. So I picked it up and I put it in my boat. Well, I did walk to my left a little bit, because I felt like something like that had happened. I walked to my left a little bit and looked, and there was an opening to the right, and I looked, and I didn't see nothing, so I just picked the stuff up, stuck it in my boat, and got out of there. And went straight to the boat landing. Okay, there was probably there was a family of people up there, and I had told them, I said, man, I just found some stuff in there. I don't know who it belongs to. And then they had told me that somebody had called 911. But anyway, I left from there. I went straight to the boat landing. I loaded my boat up, and there's a little wall on each side of the boat landing. I took the stuff out of my boat, laid it up on the wall. I loaded my boat up. That's when I looked into the little bag.
All right, so that's our witness to what was unfolding, but let's talk about some of the evidence that we've got here. Andy, you talk about dealing in evidence. Let's talk about the weapon that she purchased, the weapon that we did match it. They did match it. It was the weapon she purchased that was used. Walk us through what we know about the ballistics evidence.
Sure. So what we know about the Sig Sauer P365, which was actually a gun that I had considered purchasing before I ended up buying a Springfield weapon. This is a very reliable gun. Emphasis on reliable, because what we have here with Mica Miller is somebody who has already, on her own admission, revealed suicidal tendencies. There's a video that, for some reason, it's so impossible to get a hold of, but I've ripped a copy of it, where she, on her trip to Kenya, is talking about how she had attempted suicide one time prior, and that the gun jammed, and that it was God stopping the bullet.
I was in a battle ya kwamba nilikuwa katika vita katika akili zangu And it was so bad,
na ilikuwa ni vibaya sana,
I tried to kill myself.
nikajaribu hata nijiue, jitoe uhai,
I put a gun to my head
ya kwamba nikachukua bunduki nikaiweka kwenye kichwa changu,
and I pulled the trigger.
nami nikaanza kubonyeza ili ya kwamba nijiue,
And the bullet got caught in the gun.
lakini ya kwamba hiyo bunduki, risasi ikashikwa kwenye bunduki.
And that was God.
So perhaps if on your own admission you have suicidal tendencies, you might not want there to be another mistake. Sig Sauer will likely get that job done if that's what you're seeking out to do. Now, Dad, her father, has since gone to News Nation, or no, it was Law and Crime, I believe. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Talking about how she wanted to buy a gun to protect herself, correct? Mm-hmm. Well, in the evidence photos, that Sig Sauer will come, most times, more often than not, with an extended magazine, which, based off the evidence photos, was untouched sitting in the box. If you're going to buy a gun to protect yourself, why would you not utilize the extended magazine? Instead, utilizing the 10-round magazine, which you subsequently, supposedly used to kill yourself. Now, Dad has furthermore discussed that there were shell casings at the scene. He didn't go into any detail on the caliber. This park is a good spot to go shoot your firearm. I mean, we learned when we went to Jasper County at that remote boat landing where the woman was hogtied, left for dead. I mean, there were shell casings everywhere, all right? So it's not to say this isn't just a good shooting path. Mm-hmm. One thing Dad also noted was that there was a bullet in a tree. Well, I have since hopped on the horn with my grandfather, who's a career detective out in Texas, and he by no means reinforces any theories I have. If anything, he pushes back, and I refer to him a lot for my law enforcement stories that I do. He's worked many suicide cases. He said, while it is interesting that a woman would use a firearm to kill herself, although we've also deduced that's not uncommon, what approximately 30% of people, women,
in a 2-year period.
In a 2-year period, that's a pretty good margin. He said, yeah, sometimes there will be a test round to ensure the gun works. He said, I've worked many cases. There's a shotgun suicide. The guy shot the door first, then he shot himself. And he attested to that with pistols as well, which could corroborate why there was supposedly a live round in a tree next to where she supposedly killed herself. And another thing my grandfather noted here was that the fishermen attest to hearing one shot, right? Mm-hmm. We don't know how long that period of time was between when there could have been a test shot to ensure the gun works and a fatal shot. Mm-hmm. You know, and the longer you sit there and wait and think about it, the more depressed you're going to get, which could contribute to why the fisherman heard crying or whimpering prior to the gunshot. Mm-hmm. Just my 2 cents here.
Those are really good points.
Well, and the other thing, you were talking about the trip to Kenya. I keep going back to the statement attributed to Mica by her family members, by her friends, where she said, it won't be my finger or my hand on the gun, it'll be JP's. And I keep thinking, did she mean that, figuratively? Was she foreshadowing that she was going to do this, but making it clear why? And now, before we get into, I want to keep digging on this discussion, but as we talk about that, we got a great clip here. Lauren Taylor, one of our legal analysts, our lead legal analyst back on the Murdaugh hearing, came into the studio this week, was talking about the potential for a wrongful death suit in this case. And she brought up that very point. Let's cut to Lauren Taylor real quick.
So her sister, filing that is certainly going to be interesting to see how that plays out. She's going to have to obviously supplement the record with some sort of proof that maybe he was related to the cause of her untimely demise, or, if he aided in some way. And I think that is going to be kind of, running side by side with, we talked about earlier, the possibility of a wrongful death lawsuit arising out of this. So, we see cases at the criminal level recently where I think it was a couple years ago where we had the girl that bullied the kid into committing suicide, and she was literally, texting him saying, do it. And she was held criminally responsible, meaning she went to jail and had to serve, time in prison. The civil side of things is obviously a much easier burden to achieve. We're going to go through the same breakdown and analysis as we would in any kind of normal personal injury case. So you've got, a duty be a breach of that duty, a causation, meaning like, but for that breach, this would not have happened, and then damages is the final prong. So it's going to be, I think that the standard has opened up a lot more for these types of actions, especially with wrongful death. And the fact that it's not criminal, at least not yet, no one is, throwing that out there. I think it's going to be interesting to see how that litigation is really formed, meaning like how the complaint is formed, what type of evidence are they going to put forward. I've seen some screenshots that your, publication has put forth. I'm sure there's much more damning things that haven't been released to the public, and it tells me that he might be anticipating this wrongful death litigation coming forward because he's already retained a lawyer just to issue a blanket statement to the press that, if anyone is defaming him or calling him an abuser, that there will be, subsequent things that could be filed to address that. So
he's threatened to sue everybody. Yeah.
Right. And I would like to not get sued. But I think that he knows this isn't over. And while he's undoubtedly very relieved by, the findings of the report and the 911 call coming out, along with the video of her at the pawn store, I think that certainly clears him from a criminal standpoint. He probably hasn't put a lot of thought into what could happen on a wrongful death, but I'm assuming the lawyer that he's retained out of Myrtle Beach is hopefully advising him that this is where that train is going.
All right, so we've talked about the guns. I want to talk a little bit about the autopsy here, or rather the lack thereof. And here's another thing that gets me. I was talking earlier about I'm suspicious about, that ring footage where she's leaving the apartment and it looks like she's going to work. What the heck happened between her leaving to go to work and the pawn shop? But I'm also concerned because this is a case that Robeson County investigators have clearly acknowledged they knew about the marital issues. They knew about the fact that J.P. Miller had just been served divorce papers less than 48 hours before his wife takes his life. How do you not, at the very least, rule things out by conducting an autopsy, by doing some more of these forensic analyses? And apparently, Jen, what's the rule in North Carolina?
The autopsy and any suspicious death or, death that questionable, it is up to medical examiner. So by law, the medical examiner determines whether or not a autopsy is necessary. So judgment
call.
Right.
Wow. And then there's some accounts from the family members regarding the circumstances of Mica Miller's cremation.
So the family members have said that J.P. Miller, her estranged husband, told them he would not allow them to see her body unless they signed off on the certificate of cremation.
Wow.
But I have questions about everything.
Yeah. Who doesn't on this case?
Why would my parents have to sign off if my husband wants me cremated? I don't. That to me, I don't. I guess I've got to look into that. But I was thinking about that yesterday. I was like, well, that's a little odd.
But wouldn't we feel more comfortable if we had an autopsy on do we have specifics?
I
know what the medical
would.
examiner said about the nature of the wound.
I'd like to see a toxicology test. I would like to see, indications of stippling. If there were, her hands. I've heard there's bruises on her hands. Somebody spoke with her brother this week and he said there was bruising on her face as well. Was it bruising? Was it dirt? I don't know that we're going to know that now. Mm-hmm. I don't know that we're ever going to know that.
Andy, your thoughts on the decision not to conduct an autopsy in this case?
Well, I think we need to go back to the response here. So understand that E911 relays whatever information they're provided to responding officers. Okay? So when deputies were deployed to the state park, they were under the impression they were looking for a woman who has pretty much attested that she's going to kill herself. Now, I don't know who they spoke to once they got there, but let's just assume that they heard through the grapevine that there was at least one shot heard in the forest. All right, well, at this point in time, deputies can start putting two and two together. E911 tells us that a woman was planning to kill herself. We now have eyewitnesses talking about a gunshot. All right, perhaps we need to refine our search to looking for a body here, which was subsequently uncovered upon their own admission with the help of drone pilots and a few other what-have-yous who eventually located her.
Another fisherman actually found her body.
Okay, yeah, and they did deploy some of the toys of the sheriff's office. Yeah. So, you know, we had sleuths for the longest time knocking the way the sheriff's office responded, but understand again that they are relying on what E911 tells them. So now, based with that, is it concerning that a toxicology and an autopsy was not performed, according to some law enforcement officers who I've ran this by? Yeah.
Okay.
But we also don't know what kind of paperwork or what have you. I mean, if JP had it in place to where the parents had to sign off to view the body, but they had to cremate it first, I don't know what other tricks he had up his sleeve.
Right.
So it could not be a sheriff's office issue. And we have since brought to light this Operation Tarnished Badged, which Robeson County Sheriff's Office was once labeled the most corrupt sheriff's office in North Carolina.
A decade and a half ago, that's correct.
Yeah, it looks like one hell of a place to work in the late 90s to early 2000s. But, that for some reason has corroborated the temperament of the detectives now. But I contend that, again, as somebody being the most critical person of law enforcement in this room, what we had with the corruption over 20 years ago, right, were deputies and the sheriff enriching themselves and perhaps community members adjacent to whatever operation they were running. Not necessarily a woman with no ties to North Carolina on her father's admission, as well as no ties that I can find of J.P. Miller being up in that location.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, to me, I don't pull the corruption into the questioning. To me, I question whether or not the investigation was done correctly. Are there holes in the investigation? It may be a totally thorough investigation.
Right.
We really only have that PowerPoint presentation until we get our FOIAs back.
And again, to the sheriff's office credit, again, speaking as someone who has very strong opinions about law enforcement here, that PowerPoint presentation is a journalist's dream right there. I mean, when most of the time you're dealing with maybe a Facebook post, maybe a wholly redacted incident report, they provided a PowerPoint presentation, and we still took issue.
No, they did provide a lot of information, but it is our job to take issue. Let me ask you this, though, and Andy, this is another point where I thought you made a great point, because we've heard the debate over this 911 call. There's a ton of speculation online that it may have been faked. And Jen, one of the things that you did that absolutely blew my mind, play the 911 if you can. Do you have it with you, or we'll play it real quick. Let's listen to this. This is going to be Jen Wood speaking. Let's listen to it.
Are you able to track my cell phone location? I'm scared.
Now, Jen, that's not you, is it?
No.
That's not you. That is an AI interpretation of your voice based just on what?
I took one of my videos from Facebook where I was speaking, uploaded it to a free app I got on my phone just to play with it. It's not even a high-tech one. And typed some words in and had it read it back.
Now, how long did it take to generate that?
30 seconds at the most, and that was primarily upload time for my voice.
All right, so you upload it, but then you can start typing whatever you want to read. Is there a pinwheel, or does it just immediately spit it out?
Immediately spits it out.
So if I were to ask, what is the nature of your emergency? Would you be able to punch it in and respond and then type and then? But what if I were to ask a follow-up? Okay, you're somewhere, you don't know quite where you're at. I feel like we just have some response times that would lag.
There were some pregnant pauses in that 911, though.
There were.
But your argument, Andy, is that could be due to redactions. We don't know.
Right. We don't know.
Stuff.
And on the topic of that phone call, the 911 call that I've listened to many a times now, would the AI generate a voice crack? Would the AI generate breath?
So I listened to one that somebody with professional experience recreated with the, not just a free iPhone app. And it was created using her voice from her Facebook video, and it sounded exactly the same with the pregnant pause and the voice break.
And the voice breaks and the voice cracks. So, and here's my
bizarre.
concern when we start going down this avenue here, is that, okay, if there's an AI, okay, then you got to have some device, a phone perhaps, all right, holding that up to a separate 911 call. So now you have to have somebody else there, all right, at what point in time, you know, are you going to start tying up loose ends here?
Right.
If we go down that avenue, where do the conspiracies end?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But let's bring this back a little bit, because one of the things, you know, we've heard, obviously, witnesses, legal analysts, the AI. But let's bring this back. The reason we're all having this discussion, right, is because the red flags attached to this pastor. I haven't seen red flags like this since Tiananmen Square. They do that Chinese every decade. The Chinese Communist Party does the military parade. I've seen those are the red flags.
Oh, that many red flags.
Yeah.
That's what you're.
I'm
all right.
saying, and Jen, we got a little. This is a compilation here. We got some clips here.
Yeah.
Let's just play some of this of Pastor J.P. Miller. Let's take a listen.
Philippians 4:13 says, "There is one thing that I do. I forget those things that are past and reach out to what is ahead of me." A friend of mine that's a pastor called me last week, and one day on a Monday, his wife told him that he was the greatest husband in the world, that she loved her life and she was so appreciative. The very next day, something happened and she left. And he didn't know where she went. She just left. Left all of her things. Left everything she had, everything she worked for, everything. He didn't know what to think. He had no idea what was going on. So he hired a third-party service to find her and see where she was living and, you know, that kind of stuff. And they did. And last week they turned in all of their evidence to his lawyer. And he discovered that she had left him for one of his staff members. A young man that he had trained to learn how to preach, that he had shared his pulpit with him, a young man who the pastor had paid to go to Bible college, gave him a job. He worked hand in hand with the pastor. And in one fleeting moment, the pastor lost his wife and his good friend all at the same time. When he saw the information over at the lawyers, he started to throw up, just throw up. One trash can, second trash can, a third trash can, then he just started to dry heave. He couldn't believe what he saw was the most horrible image and worst thing you could ever imagine. The lawyer drew up the divorce papers. The lawyer told him and said, you have everything you need now. You can be divorced in 3 months. And you'll never have to see her again. You won't have to give her a dime. There's far more than enough information to take care of everything. The pastor said, give me the papers, draw them up. They got all the paperwork ready. They put the pen in his hand, and he just couldn't sign the paper. They said, but don't you see everything and don't you understand? And he called a lot of the elders, and they supported. If he wanted to leave her, just leave her. This is it. And for some reason, he just couldn't do it. And so he went home and he wrote her a letter. And all he said was, I forgive you for what you've done. And I already forgive you for whatever you're going to do. Whenever you want to be restored, just call. One day, listen, if you ever want to know what I'm going through in life, it's always about what I'm preaching about. God is so good to do that every single time. One day I'm going to preach about getting rich, strong, healthy, and finding a hot wife that loves Jesus. That's what I'm going to do. I'm just kidding. That was wrong. I told you I shouldn't be here today. When my wife went in the hospital, I looked at her phone and I counted over the past 2 years 18 people who had texted her and said, if you ever want to talk about your husband, you can talk to me and say anything and I'll keep it confidential. Why the heck does somebody want to hear what somebody else says about their spouse? And 2 of those 18 were men.
I mean, creep-tastic? What adjectives do we use to describe this guy?
Sunday sermons are basically messages to her. And he used that pulpit like a weapon. And
he talks about text messages to the family. I'm armed. Threatening messages, menacing messages. That's why we're asking these questions. And again, I got to say this. I love working with you guys because this is why, this is the kind of discussion a lot of places, I was on Seton Tucker's podcast the other day. And we're talking about a lot of the folks that they cover cases like this and they just dive into one camp. or they dive into the other camp. And this, I think, is why our media outlet, we cover these cases so well, is because we don't. We go where it takes us, and we have these spirited discussions about the evidence about.
Right. And I know, I told Andy this on the way there, when we went there, my goal was to go in and kind of like debunk these theories. Like, I don't want this to be so complicated. I want there to be answers. And I did get some. There was a theory out there that the convenience store where she stopped at, the receipt, somebody went there a week later and the receipt was completely different. So a private investigator that has been working on this case went up and asked them, did you switch out your receipt machines? He said, yeah, a week ago.
So that was a perfect.
It was an easy thing to debunk.
Yeah.
So yeah, I see that, and my concern with this case is because there was no autopsy, because there's no toxicology. My concern is that even if there is an off chance that this was something other than right, there's foul play involved. Are they ever going to be able to get enough evidence to present it to a jury? I don't know. But in the end, I think based on what I saw of Mica's final months, she was desperately trying to get away from a very controlling and abusive husband. And, whether or not it was death by suicide or foul play, I believe he was directly, you have to look at some accountability here.
Yeah.
Like Lauren said.
No, absolutely. Well, and know this, as we did have these discussions, I want to make sure everybody out there, if you've got information related to this case, any of the subjects we're discussing, please send it to us. Research at FITSNews, Jen at FITSNews, Andy at FITSNews. Send it to us. We would love to take a look at it and dig deep, see what holds up, see what doesn't. But also, as we continue to cover this case, I want everyone to know we are diving deep, not only into the story of J.P. Miller, but the family history here, related narratives that tie into this story that, again, a lot of it doesn't add up, folks, and we're going to continue to ask the questions to try to get to the truth, because ultimately at FITSNews, that's what it's about, finding the truth and assigning accountability where it belongs. Count on us to continue to do that and explore every angle of this story and every story we cover. So last summer, this media outlet was covering a case out of Columbia, South Carolina, the 5th Judicial Circuit, involving a violent sexual assault. And it was noteworthy because it was one of the few cases that we've covered in which South Carolina's justice system got it right. Solicitor Byron Gibson, Judge Heath Taylor, both of them did right by the victim in that case. But more importantly, as we pointed out in our coverage, the victim did right by herself. Gibson described her repeatedly as courageous. Judge Taylor described her as brave. Her testimony, confronting her accuser, was what solidified the guilty verdict that put him in jail for decades in the aftermath of that assault. But what we didn't know at the time, because we don't identify the names of victims of sexual assault, what we didn't know at the time is that that brave, courageous victim who confronted her accuser in court had a connection to the biggest story we probably ever covered here at FITSNews, the Murdaugh murders, crime, and corruption saga. That's because the victim was MaryElizabeth Murdoch, the daughter of Randy Murdaugh, the attorney from Hampton, South Carolina, and the niece of Alec Murdaugh. Now, how do we know that? Because this week, MaryElizabeth dropped a TED Talk in which she discussed not only the details of the attack, but the aftermath and the tragedy that befell her family just a month later. Now, I don't watch a lot of TED Talks. I've never given a TED Talk. A ton of people watch them, apparently. But whatever you call it, this was one of the most compelling, not interview, but solo expressions, solo experiences, testimonials I've ever heard. And I want to cut to a couple clips here. The first clip I want to cut to is MaryElizabeth actually describing the moment of the attack, how she was able to survive that violent assault. Let's take a listen to MaryElizabeth Murdoch.
On a regular day in 2021, my life would change forever. I was asleep in my apartment until I woke in the middle of the night to the sound of my door opening. The door of my small apartment that led to the outside was right by my bed, and when I looked up, there was a man standing above me. His hand was in his pants, masturbating to the sight of my sleeping body. I had never seen eyes like the ones that he looked at me with. I screamed, which invited him in, and he told me that if I screamed again, he would kill me, and I believed him. I was trapped with him for about 20 minutes. In this fight, I would have to use my tools, the same tools that I developed to fight my depression. I had to exert physical strength, but more than that, I had to show emotional strength. Everything I had learned was essential to this moment. There are a few things that impacted what happened and how I got out. The first is acceptance. No one heard me scream. No one was going to save me. I remember thinking if I was going to get out, I would have to think of a way. The second is presence. I was in pain from being beaten, but it was essential that I didn't lose consciousness. When he choked me and I knew I was about to pass out, I took a deep breath, and at the last possible moment, I let my body go limp. He thought that I had passed out, which gave me a few seconds to create space in between us so that we could talk. The third thing that saved me is mindful observation. I noticed that when I spoke, he responded differently to tones of my voice. I was able to figure out a bit about the man in front of me. When he looked at my body, I grabbed his face and I forced him to look me in the eye. I told him, I am a good person and you are doing something horrible. I confronted him with his actions, and while it didn't save me from the assault, it humanized the experience. I had to allow myself to look into his eyes and connect with him in order to move through this skillfully. I asked him about himself, his relationship to life, his family, and when he realized that I was distracting him and became aggressive again, I had already thought of a way out. He responded so well to assertiveness that I decided to negotiate. It is sad that I had to negotiate my sexuality, but I never had plans to do what I told him that I was going to do. I positioned myself perfectly in the room. I took off my clothes, and when his guard was down, I took off running. He followed behind me, but he slipped and fell at my ankles, giving me the few extra seconds that I needed to escape. When the police arrived, they cleared my bedroom, and then they let me peek in. I saw my own bloody handprints on the walls, my gold pajamas laying on the floor, and my once white bed stained red. My childhood stuffed bunny sitting right there in the pool of my blood.
In addition to describing the attack, MaryElizabeth also talked about the courage that was necessary to confront her attacker again in court, to relive everything. And again, as I noted in our original coverage last summer, that's not something that everyone has the strength to do. And again, I'm not saying it's something we should expect everyone to have the strength to do. It's something I couldn't imagine. But in addition to that, she talked about what happened the very next month. The Murdaugh murders, the killings at Moselle, the graphic double homicide of her aunt, of her cousin. And in discussing it, I think for the first time, we hear a member of the Murdaugh family really evoke genuine sympathy. You feel the angst and you feel the frustration as, again, she discusses how the story quickly spun out of control. Here's MaryElizabeth talking about the media frenzy that followed the double homicide.
About a month after my attack, my dad received a phone call from his brother saying that his wife and son had been badly shot. My dad was out the door in no time, and my mother, sister, and myself stood speechless with no information. I called my other uncle, and I asked him what we could do, and he said nothing. They're dead. There's nothing to be done. Both of them? I asked him. Both of them, he told me. On the kitchen floor, we held each other and cried. The media would call it execution-style murders. The media would change everything. 2 days later, my grandfather passed away. He passed in his bed surrounded by his children and grandchildren, and we held his hands, expressing our love and gratitude towards him, sending him gently into death. Within a few days, my family experienced both the most violent and intrusive of deaths and the most peaceful and loving of ones. This is life. It's love and it's pain. The story of the murders is a long and complicated one. We found out that my uncle is an addict and had been stealing money from the law firm founded by my family generations ago. It was a total shock and the ultimate betrayal to the integrity of our family. Since then, he has been found guilty for the murders of his wife and son. The conflict is deep and complex and has caused so much pain for so many people. It became a headline in the global media where millions of people try to make sense of this story. It was adopted by the true crime community, where it was turned into documentaries, podcasts, countless news articles and segments. And I watched the biggest heartbreak of my life turn into entertainment for millions. This changed everything I know. People that I thought loved me separated themselves from me. I was truly confronted with grief. Me and my family had our hearts broken in front of everyone, and some people chose to hold us, hug us, stand with us. Others chose to write movies about it. In 2022, I had the opportunity to travel, and when I'm sitting on a little island off the coast of Italy, and I overhear ladies discussing the scandal and getting the facts all wrong, I have to laugh. Remember when my biggest problem was that I was lonely? Now I have to tell strangers the truth of my life's experience because they think that they know the story better than I do? Later that summer, I dedicated some time to my yoga practice, and I went to Indonesia to study healing arts. I spent my 22nd birthday in the sky on the way to Bali. It was my first time away from home for a substantial amount of time. And there I would discover a feeling of comfortable displacement, which I would take on as a theme for the next phase of my life. I wanted to integrate my academic interest in politics with my personal interest in healing and spirituality, so I looked for outlets to study cultural advocacy. A few months later, it was January of 2023, and I was on a plane to France with my companion. He's the sweetest, funniest, most handsome boy in all of Paris, my little dog Tolly. And having him with me on this journey has been the treat of my life, honestly. Nothing could define comfortable displacement like being alone in a new country, me and my dog. My first week of school was also the first week of the murder trial. So on my walk home from class, I put up a live stream of the trial on YouTube, and I watched my friends and family as I walked through my new city. In the summer of 2023, I had to go back to South Carolina and finish my own trial. 1 year after I had left for Indonesia, on my 23rd birthday, I met my attacker again in court. I looked him in his eyes and I fought him with the same strength that I did the first time. In the end, justice was served, as I believe it always is in one way or another. I came back to Paris and have started the rest of my life. I couldn't imagine the relief and freedom that I feel with that chapter of my life closed. Now, some days, a few days will go by and I won't even think of the trauma. I love my life in Paris, even with its challenges. I'm proud to have separated myself from what I know and created something of my own. I feel very free, and I'm very grateful.
So again, say what you want about the Murdochs. Say what you want about MaryElizabeth. Someone will say, oh, entitled, rich, she's living in Paris, all that. No. This is an incredibly brave woman, an incredibly courageous woman. And she's an example, by the way, to anyone who's been in that position. Again, never expect people to have that kind of courage and that kind of mindfulness and foresight. But the way that she handled that from start to finish is a huge reason why accountability was able to be achieved in her case. And I'm going to tell you something right now. Her story and the tons of other stories where this happens is precisely why this media outlet is so aggressive, so outspoken, so obstinate, so persistent when it comes to the issue of judicial reform. If you watched the show last week, I went off on how pathetic politicians in South Carolina at the General Assembly in Columbia have been on this issue. This is why. This is why, is because victims like this, we can't count on every single victim to be MaryElizabeth Murdoch. We just can't. But we should count on the system to be there for all of them, to maximize the chance for justice in their cases. So count on us to not only continue calling every case that we come across like we see it, giving credit where credit's due, but also to continuing our push to hold that court system here in the Palmetto State accountable. All right, that's a wrap for this week's edition of Your Week in Review. I want to thank Jen Wood and Andy Fancher for coming in here and discussing everything they've learned about Mica Miller. Also, Dylan Nolan behind the camera. Dylan is hard at work on the next edition of the Month in Review. That's right, our third installment of this new format. We're just 2 weeks away. I wonder what case we're going to talk about. Anybody want to guess here? Figuring Mica Miller is going to factor pretty prominently in that episode. But we're going to take your questions. We're going to continue to dig in this story. So be on the lookout for that Month in Review coming in 2 weeks' time right here on FITSNews.